after the one so she's wrong, go to the private chiropractor now. Oh, I said it's a nice day out.
Ben Kearns, can you tell if we're live streaming at the moment? It looks as though we are, but I just want to double check if you can see the YouTube site, see if it's live streaming.
Let's check now. Yes, I can see it on YouTube. So it looks good.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ben. So everybody, we are live streaming at the moment.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Transport Committee. I'd like to welcome all our Transport Committee members, portfolio holders, our operators, and we have a guest this morning, Claire Haig from Greener Journeys. I'll just start with my introduction. It's been an incredibly busy couple of months for transport, having to adapt to changing regulations, and recently having entered a second lockdown. This has stopped work, demonstrated by the number of value updates within this meeting. The last few months have largely been on addressing the challenges of COVID on our transport system, along with regular meetings such as the Train Operators Forum and our Active Travel Working Group. I would also like to acknowledge the recent meetings of our District Committee chairs, led by my colleagues in West Yorkshire districts, who received an update on the zero carbon pathways work during the October meetings. Looking to the future, it's important that we build a resilient transport system that is built on the foundations of inclusive and clean growth, which is reflected in many of the reports that will be discussed today, including a guest presentation from Claire Haig at Greener Journeys. I would also like to take some time to acknowledge the continued challenges of the current COVID pandemic. There's been a significant impact on public transport, and it is with the deepest sadness to hear news of transport colleagues passing away. I'd like to pay tribute to those working across the transport world who have been affected by coronavirus, and give thanks to all the teams who have kept the transport system running by starting this meeting with a 2 minute silence for all those working in the public transport system have sadly passed away from COVID. We will now just observe 2 minutes silence, and especially thinking of the 2 bus drivers that sadly passed away in Leeds from first. Thank you.
Two minutes have now passed.
Thank you, Ben. So we'll move straight on to the agenda. So apologies for absence.
I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Ellis and Simon Pringle.
And I'd like to give Councillor Korshik's apologies as well. Thank you. Declarations of disposable pecuniary interests. I can't see any hands raised. Exempt information, possible exclusion of the press and public.
There are no items today that require the exemption of the press or public.
Thank you, Ben. So we'll move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on the September 4th. Can we accept those minutes as being accurate, or are there any matters arising? I'm looking for hands. Matters arising. Councillor Mulheron.
Chair, I just wanted to ask for my attendance to be recorded at the meeting of the 4th of September.
Apologies, Councillor Mulheron. I will correct that and republish it.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay. So I think other issues may be raised in the later items. So this morning, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Claire Haig. Claire's the Chief Executive of Greener Journeys. I first saw Claire speak at the Bus Summit in 2018 and was really inspired by her words and have followed her work closely ever since. As noted in the report, Claire has a wide range of involvement across the transport sector, including chairing the Delivery and Impacts Independent Review panel for the government's joint air quality, whilst also having the time to write a monthly column of passenger transport. Greener Journeys is an organisation committed to encouraging greener travel and is an important organisation to learn from, and if we are to achieve our net zero carbon ambitions. I will now hand you over to Claire to run through her presentation. Thank you, Claire, and welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you very, very much for your very kind words. It's much appreciated, and for introducing Greener Journeys and for this opportunity today. I'm delighted to be joining you all this morning, just to say a few words, really an update on our work, on what we're focusing on, and really just sort of, hopefully there'll be plenty of time for discussion as well. So, I mean, as Kim's already said, we are very much dedicated to encouraging more sustainable travel. And we are particularly focused on quantifying the wider social, economic and environmental benefits of sustainable travel. That's really been our real kind of USB focus. And we've sort of then quantified those benefits and then campaigned on those benefits. We've also worked very widely across the sector, and our initiative, the Transport Knowledge Hub, uniquely brings together local and central government, LEPs, and the wider transport community to encourage investments that will facilitate inclusive and sustainable economic growth. That's been our mission for a few years. It certainly hasn't changed, and in fact is more relevant than ever today. Now, the particular focus of our work at the moment is on how to decarbonise transport. It is, of course, the biggest emitting sector in the UK economy, and we urgently need to make more progress. We repeatedly say that rising demand for car and van travel is the central reason why transport emissions remain stubbornly high. And if the UK is to be a credible host of the COP26 Climate Summit next year, we've really got to show tangible progress on reducing emissions from our most polluting sector. So with this in mind, just to reflect on the announcement this week, the bringing forward of the ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans to 2030 as part of the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, certainly ticks a big box. It's a critical milestone for the UK's automotive sector. And with the UK being Europe's second largest car market, we are setting a bold example to countries around the world. So good, that is a good tick. It's understood that the Treasury had been considering proposals for a national road pricing scheme as part of the PM's 10-point plan. Road pricing, as we have not tired of saying, has always been the most effective way to tackle congestion and pollution. But of course now, with the advent of electric vehicles and rapidly diminishing receipts from fuel duty, the government faces a 40 billion black hole in its public finances eventually. So, there's a fiscal imperative. However, it seems that for now, road pricing has once again been kicked into the long grass, perhaps not entirely surprising, as our experience shows that politicians will always find a reason to delay the onset of road pricing. Anyhow, over the past year, through our Transport Knowledge Hub, we've been assembling thought leadership and insight on how to decarbonise transport. And the key question we've been asking is, what would be a credible and politically deliverable framework for decarbonising transport whilst mitigating any negative social impacts? It's absolutely crucial that the transition to net zero is just and fair. So from all our events and blogs, articles over the last year, I could summarise 5 key themes that have emerged. First, we need a total reformulation of transport pricing. Road pricing tops the list. The external costs of transport must be internalised. It is the failure of road taxation to cover externalities that means that we have been over-consuming our roads. So we've got to give more attention to prices and taxation if we're going, and indeed, and again, something that is widely shared, reverse the decline in fuel duty. Our research, Green Agenda's research, shows that the freeze and fuel duty since 2011 has caused 5% more traffic and an additional 5 million tonnes of CO2 emissions by encouraging more trips by car and fewer trips by public transport. And also, how can it be cheaper? We looking at other modes. How can it be cheaper to fly from London to Edinburgh than to catch the train, when emissions per passenger kilometre for air travel is 6 times that of rail? So we've really got to look at the whole formulation, how we look at transport pricing in the round. The second key theme is that public transport must be central to decarbonisation. It's fundamental to reducing congestion. It's a really efficient way of moving people, both in movement and in carbon terms. It's an absolute no-brainer. But transport is also a universal service obligation. So, you know, no citizen can participate in our society unless they have access to transport. It's a view that has been strongly expressed from members of our community, is that every citizen has a basic human right to live without a car. Our Greener Journeys research has shown that the research conducted for us by the University of Leeds, that a 10% improvement in public transport connectivity is associated with a 3.6% reduction in social deprivation. So ticks all the boxes. It's fair, just, and it's a fast way to get to net zero. The third big theme, and one that's, I think, in a way been put into even sharper focus with the pandemic, is that we really do need to reduce the need to travel. It's clear there are opportunities that we've experienced this year. COVID has clearly accelerated some structural changes in the economy, such as working from home, which we do need to harness in the system of green recovery. And, you know, if we look at the system as a whole, digitalization increasingly is going to be driving the entire economy going forward in the future. I mean, it is going to be a really important part. So our system of regulation needs to be redesigned to reflect that, and crucially to overcome the silos of government, both nationally and locally. I mean, there is a powerful case right now for investing in broadband instead of building new roads. The 27 billion road budget could perhaps be better invested making it easier for people to work from home. But of course, this must go alongside a more efficient system for freight and logistics, because, you know, otherwise growing internet shopping is going to eventually bring our local roads to a standstill. And we know that in nose-to-tail traffic, emissions from vehicles can increase up to fourfold. But certainly the increase in walking and cycling that we've seen through the pandemic has been much welcomed and is being much supported, and we fully support that, and we do need to make sure that we lock in those changes. So the fourth key theme is that we must reform the current appraisal system. So our current framework for analysing public investments is on the basis of cost-benefit analysis, which is looking at individual projects. This tends to favour car schemes. We need what we need to be looking at is a low carbon road, rail, air integrated system. And this, which will require us to really prioritise carbon reduction. So therefore appraising whole packages of policies, not single schemes. Also, the integration of public transport with new housing and land use planning will be vitally important if we are to reduce emissions and avoid building in more congestion and pollution in the future. We've got research that's undertaken for us by KPMG that shows that new developments in urban centres, well connected by public transport, can stimulate 50% more economic growth than equivalent developments located at the fringe, whilst also dramatically reducing congestion. So we also need to reform transport funding and governance so that cities can plan for housing, transport and jobs on an integrated long-term basis. This is going to require greater devolution. We definitely need more devolution. Because the key thing is that it will be properly empowered and funded city, region, transport authorities that will be critical to both the levelling up agenda and to delivering better net zero transport. I'd like to just reflect on a blog that Mayor of North Tyne, Jamie Driscoll, wrote for Greener Journeys, where he imagines a public transport so good that you'd rather not use your car. I mean, it's really very poetic. I recommend you read it. A system designed to move people rather than vehicles. And he sets out clearly that he wants a transport system in 10 years' time that is affordable for everyone, improves public health, and saves the NHS money. So finally, the fifth key theme, coming back full circle really to where I started, technical solutions will not be sufficient. We really need to think fundamentally about behaviour change. Now, COVID-19 may have turned the world upside down, and it has challenged many of our assumptions, but the case for mass transit remains as strong as ever. A double-decker bus can take 75 cars off the road. Car use in the north is especially high because public transport urgently needs investment. So investing in bus and rail networks is integral to the government's levelling up agenda and to delivering on net zero. Now, another blog written for us, actually published today by Henry Morrison of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, he talks about why the full delivery of HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail is critical to decarbonising our transport system. HS2's carbon contributions, he calculates, will be 7 times less than passenger cars and 17 times less than that of domestic air travel. So kind of concluding and hopefully looking forward to some questions. Whilst the impact of COVID-19, without question has and continues to be devastating, I think my central message today is it would be a serious mistake to think that this lessens the case for investment in public transport. There can be no sustainable transport system without road pricing. So we are living through very unsettled and uncertain times, but the fundamentals haven't changed. If we're going to build back better, we need a massive shift from private transport to public, shared and active travel. So thank you for listening. End of my introductory remarks. Are there any questions?
You're on mute, I think, Councillor Groves.
Thank you. We'll move to questions. Thank you, Claire. I've got questions from Councillor Mulheron and Councillor Buckley.
Sorry, Chair, I think I still have my hand up from before, but I guess a couple of quick questions. The discussion around road user charging and bearing in mind that Claire's involved with the government's joint air quality units. Are there any plans for those sorts of measures to be introduced nationally that she's aware of?
Well, I mean, I think what I would say, I haven't got any concrete to point to, but what I would say is that government really does need to be braver. I think there is anecdotal and more, there is evidence that this could be an opportunity and actually what's very interesting, and this is something that I think Powell shared with us at one of our events, just experienced in London. If you really focus on the air quality agenda, you can really get traction. I mean, joining up decarbonisation and air quality together, as you've just referred, obviously, that air quality can really bring more support. So I would say that I continue to lobby, and we continue to watch with great interest. I mean, there was speculation earlier this week. I was getting quite excited that something might have been announced this week, and it doesn't appear to have been. But I live in hope, because I think really that in the end, this is something where I think we really do need to work collectively to make the case and really to give as much power to the elbow of politicians, because it is politically so difficult. I mean, that we understand that. And that's where all the evidence that we can bring and the agenda and the timing and all of that, it ought to be possible. But anyway, the short answer is sadly no. I'm not aware of current plans. I know it's been considered, but nothing that's coming out imminently.
Thank you. Councillor Buckley?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And it was very interesting. The whole presentation from Claire was very interesting indeed, particularly the stuff about road pricing. And if we all watched Yes Minister from years ago, it would have been classed as a very brave decision, Minister. I think one of the Europeans said a few years ago, we know what we should do. The difficulty is getting re-elected when we've done it. And I think that falls into that kind of band. But just a couple of questions. Claire mentioned reducing the need to travel, which is an interesting concept, because at the moment, of course, the travelling has gone down to a very, very low level indeed. But even allowing for that, if this is the thrust of one of the intentions, how can the need for travel be reduced? how will future bus companies and railway operators attract enough passengers to be viable, given the state that we're in now? And then secondly, on a similar theme, actually, everybody seems to be assuming that within, somebody said to me the other day, 7 years, everything will be entirely back to as it was, and passenger numbers will be as they were in 2019. What actual modelling is taking place now to back up those assumptions?
Thank you. There's three really good points. And actually to start from the beginning, on your comments on the road pricing and the brave politician, it would be a brave politician. Absolutely right. And I just wanted to add that this is something that's discussed a lot, which is why some of our wider community have talked about eco, how do we repackage it? How do we make it? Don't call it road pricing, call it something, there is the communication of this, but it is really important. But the point is, and the reason why it is an important point, so I'll just dwell on it for a tiny bit longer, if I may, is that even with how we are going to have to reduce the sheer volume of traffic on the roads if we're going to meet our carbon reduction targets. And I think we're going to need anything between 20 and 60% of the estimates I've seen of reduction of traffic on our roads by 2030, regardless of EVs, etc. So there is still this, we absolutely need to accelerate to more electric vehicles, but we also need to, switch to public transport, walking and cycling. So to your second point, I mean, in the world in which that we envisage, in the ideal world that we hope it's an achievable world, our vision is that we have this massive shift from car and van, much more efficient logistics. So that's a whole different area in itself, but a massive shift from car and van to public transport, walking and cycling, and we need that for cleaner air, etc. But the point you make is absolutely crucial and valid, and I hear it 100%, because it is devastating to bus companies. The online shopping, for example, with the number of shopping trips that are no longer happening, and of course that's a double whammy for bus companies, because not only are people not travelling by bus to the city centre, which used to be the primary mode of access to city centres for buying, for purchasing goods and services, what have you, but also the buses that, with all the congestion, increased congestion on the roads, the buses are getting caught up with more and more congestion, so slower and everything else. It's a double whammy, worsening congestion, which is very, very bad for buses in particular on the roads, and of course the online shopping. So there aren't easy answers to this, but to not have public transport absolutely front and centre. So we haven't yet had the national bus strategy. It's talked about, we know it's coming, and in the announcements this week, there were still positive noises. So we just have to hope that's still that shift to public transport is still part of what government is wanting, as it set out in its setting the challenge paper in March. We have to push in that direction. It isn't easy, because people are changing. It is both work, and of course working from home is particularly devastating for rail travel, which is actually why, of course, bus travel is bouncing back a little bit faster, even though whilst it's still much down on previous levels than rail travel, which has been particularly badly hit with more online people working from home. So, and in terms of the projections, I don't have any of those to my fingertips at this point. I mean, it's something that I know that all the public transport companies are constantly modelling and looking at what the future looks like. And quite frankly, I don't think any of us know. We are in such uncertain and unsettled times. So it's a rapidly moving picture. But I just come back to say the fundamental just hasn't changed. That mass transit, it's our cities, I believe, will come back because people need to congregate, but we don't know. I mean, maybe they won't. I mean, actually, nobody really knows. But I'm working on the assumption that something more akin to what we used to have will eventually come back, and we need to make sure that when it does, it's greener and fairer, much more based around public transport. I hope that answers your question.
Councillor de Gaulle?
Yes, sort of following on that theme about road pricing, I just wonder whether you think that there might be scope, if the government are too timid about a national scheme, whether there might be an opportunity for devolved authorities. I mean, I'm conscious that Leeds has came quite close to having effectively a pricing mechanism in place with the Clean Air Zone, which is on hold at the moment. But given that a national scheme would obviously involve much longer lead time for the technology to be there, in places like the combined authority areas in the north, as you say, the political sensitivity is such that it would need to be something like a combined authority or several combined authorities agreeing to implement it across the north, but as a mechanism for funding that public transport. Whether you think that that's a model that's worth considering and discussing as a pilot, if you like, for the government for a national scheme.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's a number of really good questions, a number of comments on that. I mean, one of the benefits of a national scheme is it gives air cover. Because I think it is very equally politically difficult for locally for politicians as it is for national. So there is a sense in which it's not fair to pass all the really hard decisions down. So there is a bit of a sense of that, and also there's a sort of simplicity. But I think the other point, of course, is that we had referenda, should I say, and obviously Edinburgh, Manchester, notably as well. And when but then again, that was a while ago. There was a very interesting proposal that we published actually on the Transport Knowledge Hub, and it's on our Green Journeys website, by Professor Stephen Glaister, Tony Travis and David Bayliss on funding transport, which looks at and actually speaks exactly really to what you were just outlining. And they looked at a very, very interesting system of how they certainly saw a use for, I think their proposal was, if I recall correctly, was using fuel duty, but actually having that to go to the local area, the local transport authorities, to ring fence and use for beneficial transport purposes. And I think the way they saw doing that would be the form of a trust, a kind of a public trust or something. So that's one of many interesting ideas along those sorts of lines, and I think it was one that we discussed in March earlier this year. Absolutely. I mean, quite frankly, however we get there, and whichever feels like the easiest place to start, I think we must just embrace and keep all options open. I personally feel it's absolutely fundamental. We just won't get there without it. I really passionately believe that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Swift, then Councillor Sutherland, and Councillor Salam. Councillor Swift.
Yes, Claire, you've spoken a lot about cities.
Yes.
Now, how different would your address have been if you were talking about towns? By towns, I'm talking about the communities, say, in the 10,000 to 100,000 range, of which we've actually got probably about 50% of West Yorkshire is comprised of that kind of urban geography rather than cities. How different would it be what you'd said to us if you were talking about towns?
Well, I would say an awful lot of my central message applies equally, in fact, to any geographical. I mean, the difference is when you get to more rural areas and maybe smaller towns, slightly different solutions and slightly different emphasis. But I think the fundamentals don't really change. I mean, when we look at the rural, I know you've asked about towns, but I've suddenly gone on to rural because I'm thinking at the other end of the different type of geographical. We do need to think more out of the box, and we do need more to be more innovative. At the same time, the sort of demand responsive model, the kind of the mobility as a service, those sorts of platforms, certainly the walking, cycling, all of that, and really integrating public transport with planning, I think is fundamental, so that we don't build in more future problems, that we build around. And this applies across the board, whether rural, small town, large town, city, wherever you are, whatever, peri-urban, urban, metropolitan, is as far as possible to build housing, new housing developments around existing public transport hubs, or making sure that sustainable transport is fully integrated into that, so that you don't, because actually you find that is a big barrier. I think the fundamentals, that there are different areas will have different governance structures and will have different levels and different ways of delivering, well, basically delivering transport, but I think the fundamentals are the same. So I wouldn't change particularly the central message, but if I had a particularly rural audience, I would probably possibly say a little bit more about that.
So, Councillor Sutherland, thank you. Councillor Sutherland.
Thank you. I think Councillor Swift stole the words out of my mouth. I was about to ask about towns and how we provide solutions, not just for rural areas, but including estates where sometimes to be able to get a bus once an hour, to be able to get a bus that's reliable and on time is absolutely massive. And they're unlikely to see trams in the near future in some of these areas. A lot of these people live and are going to remain living on existing estates with existing transport issues. So I'm really interested about other solutions that we might have, like demand responsive transport and other things that we can do to transform public transport for those people for whom public transport means a long walk, maybe in the rain, and then having to get several buses. And how do we provide something that's actually quite radically different, that transforms people's way of thinking what the bus is? So as you described earlier, it's the first choice, and people think that the car is a more inconvenient choice rather than having public transport that comes nearer to your home and is more reliable and gives you the chance to read a book on your way to work.
And buses, sorry, had you finished? Should I just ask? No, thank you. And I am a real believer in the bus, I hasten to add. I've spent an awful lot of the last decade plus just quantifying particularly the wider benefits of bus travel. And the advantage of bus, of course, over tram, which I also believe in any public transport, to be honest, but the advantage in some of those hard to reach areas, the flexibility. You can very quickly respond to need. You can quickly put in new infrastructure. And so I think there's a sort of, and the costs associated. I mean, we know that sort of investing in bus infrastructure, if I may share another stat, maybe some of these numbers would revise perhaps with the way the economy is changing so much, so we have to look at some of this, but investment in bus infrastructure gives massive returns. We've seen, I mean, up to sort of £8 of wider economic benefit for every £1 invested. Of course, that does depend on the area, but the case for investing in bus and for getting, we know, for example, that for job seekers, something like sort of 77% of job seekers have got no access to a car, van, or motorbike, and actually for them, bus is the transport. That is it, and that rises to 87% of young job seekers. So it's so important. The economies of scale mean that it's difficult sometimes to justify putting in a whole bus route, but we have to find a way, because the point is we need this fair and just transition as well, and that does mean we need to look at transport as not just really important for the economy, and which it is, because it's enabling facilitating vital parts of the economy, important for reducing carbon, but crucially it's that social value as well that I alluded to as I was going through my introductory comments. So it's really important. And again, I just would reiterate all the things that we need to do. I mean, we know that people, cost, convenience, and these factors are important. We know that actually congestion, we have to tackle that. It's really important, because if people are just, we do need to give good bus priority, those sorts of access on the road so that buses can compete. And it's having that availability, having that sort of ability to just not have to do so many different bus journeys to get to, it's a more integrated network, which is why I think we need to come back to looking at planning holistically, which again is, whilst I was looking at those comments from the city perspective, they absolutely apply. Planning holistically, housing, jobs, economy, all of those things, and that buses are vital facilitator, all of that. Hence the importance of looking and being able to plan on a long-term integrated basis, which I think is really fundamental. And then in doing that, you can then bring those vital parts of vital facilitators of the economy front and centre.
Thank you, Claire. Just on the back of that, how do you think we can persuade government to change their approach in appraising schemes and investing long-term funding for local transport? Just before I bring the next speakers in on questions, there was a pilot on total transport that did, look at economies of scale, and probably that it's maybe time to revisit that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not close to the total transport, though I do know about it, and I know Stephen Joseph and some of my colleagues have been very much more closely involved with it. But that sort of thinking and that sort of concept is absolutely crucial. There's a really brilliant bit of work it's just come to my mind. I just must share it, because I think this when your question as to how do we persuade government, or how do we make the case? So I don't know if there's a piece of work that looks at how to and I will forward this on so you can circulate it, but the kind of moving from a car-based perspective. Peter Jones, Professor Peter Jones, UCL, was very involved in this. It was a wider European project, and how we can move from a car-dominated perspective to a much more sustainable, and the cities a much more sustainable perspective, but to mobility, and then ultimately to place. Where we're really, and in order to do that, one of the things that's missing is values that we can put into appraisal on place. We know we've got the time savings, but we do need appraisal tools and values that we can put to quantify, and that would help make the case for a more place-based developments and those the kind of interventions that will create that kind of much more congestion-free, pollution-free, but to really quantify, we need to quantify those benefits. So I think that there's a need for research, there's a need for actual analysis to show that, because that will help to make the case to Treasury. And I know that there's a lot of work going on the Green Book at the moment, and these are the sorts of things that I think need to be considered.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Salam and then Councillor Caffrey. Councillor Salam.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Claire. That's the beauty of actually going about 6th or 7th in the queue. Everybody's actually asked some of the stuff that you wanted to ask, and some of, but I mean, your early comments that the road fund could be better used on broadband, and then as the sort of conversation developed, things actually change. But I mean, we've been talking about the right investment in public transport, which is much needed. Good infrastructure, because what people are looking at in the public transport is reliability and affordability. Those are the two main issues. But the presence of the public transport is also very vital, because you need good, cleaner buses that have all the gadgets that young people nowadays need, which is Wi-Fi, USB charging, things like that. But you also then alluded to that there's got to be a just transition, and I think that is the most important thing between public transport and technology, because what you don't want is people clogged up at home doing all the internet shopping on their broadband, not going out, not mixing and mingling when we are allowed to do that. And that will also then have an impact on mental health, on NHS, people's health. So it's the right investment, just transition, good infrastructure, and good affordability. These are the sort of 4 key points that if we have those at the heart of our conversations, we will have a good, reliable, affordable public transport, because whatever job takes longer, you pay more. Whatever job takes shorter time, you pay less. And I think that's where the devil's in the detail there, that we need good, fast transport, and then we can start talking about the sort of network and how we serve the communities that are most needed. That's what my sort of contribution would be.
Thank you. And can I just say thank you so much. I really agree with what you were saying. It's brilliant. I'm so pleased that you highlighted loneliness, because this is the next epidemic. I mean, we are facing an epidemic of loneliness, and actually we've got research, another stat, I'm afraid. A third of people in the UK have deliberately caught the bus to have some human contact. So we need to get that back. We 100% need to get that back. So thank you very much for your contribution. I really agree with you.
I'm going to take the next two speakers, and I think I've covered everybody who wanted to speak on this. So I've got Councillor Carfrae and Councillor Cahill, then I will have to close this part of the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Chair. My question's about road pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I guess the idea of road pricing is twofold. One, to raise revenue, and certainly to encourage people, for want of a better word, to use public transport. The thing is, I mean, I just see the revenue already from motoring dropping considerably. Road tax is lower than it used to be, especially for the low emission cars. It'll probably disappear before long. There's a VAT on fuel duty. The fuel duty itself, you said the fuel duty had been frozen. Mm-hmm. Now, these things raise billions and billions of pounds. Now, I don't know how road pricing will replace that, but you're talking about investing in public transport. But we've got a dwindling revenue base from motoring versus a higher investment bill for transport. And I just wondered how the two collate, really, because I know it's quite a long-term thinking, but someone's got to think about the finances of this, because the more green we get, the cheaper driving comes, and the electricity isn't taxed and stuff like that. So whether the government will start putting electric on tax on and charging electric cars, I don't know, but that's going to be very popular, I expect, in the long run. So there must be some thought behind how it's all going to be funded. Thank you.
So crucial, the points you raise. Absolutely, that's right. And I'm really, by the way, I'm really glad that we're focusing so much in this discussion on road pricing, because as far as I'm concerned, it is so important, and particularly now. I mean, that is why the Chancellor was really considering road pricing, because there is going to be this 40 billion black hole. I mean, there's a sort of, that's around about 28 billion on fuel duty receipts at the moment. I think it's something about 5 billion on the VAT on the fuel, and VED about 7. It's something that's the sort of order. So that's 40 billion. That is just going to be going down. Of course, the other problem, which you're absolutely right to highlight, electric cars. Okay, at the moment, there's a barrier because they're about £10,000 more expensive than a conventional car, petrol diesel car. But once you've got one, but those costs are coming down because the batteries are improving dramatically, and we anticipate by the middle of the 2020s that will be at parity. But the running costs are so much cheaper. So really, if we don't move fast, we are going to have a major problem with congestion. And a further shift away from public transport if we don't get the taxation side right. Now, I know that there's going to be an announcement next week from the Chancellor, sort of autumn statement, I think, or whatever it is that he's coming out next week. I'm praying that there's going to be something around this in that statement, because if we don't think really hard, as you're quite right to stress, we are going to have a major problem. We'll be encouraging people. You don't want to disincentivize people. You want people to buy greener vehicles and to buy electric vehicles, but at the same time, we can't create a problem where we're disincentivizing public transport and when we're actually eventually going to have this black hole. So this really, and that's where road pricing, if ever there was a moment, an opportunity as we switch, that you could make a case, politically deliverable case, surely it has to be now. We just need to carry on having this discussion, I think, is my main answer, my main summary. But I agree, we have to think about this.
Thank you.
Councillor Cahill.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, and thanks, Claire. That was really interesting, and a number of interesting points. There's just one I wanted to touch on a bit. I mean, planning for transport is always something that I'm very interested in and engaged in, because there are so many people that are costed out of having a car that the real only way of providing opportunities that everyone can access is by building things in places where they can get to them, either locally or on routes. But I've also been considering recently that need to travel less, and it seems to me that there's a real opportunity for public transport and for shared vehicles, taxis, on-demand transport, etc. when people travel less, because there are so many people that can't afford a car. But for those of us that can, when you start using that vehicle less, it suddenly becomes a huge cost with the purchase of the vehicle in the first place, the insurance over the year. I mean, public transport, the one thing you do is pay as you go. Effectively, that's a form of road pricing, you could say. But actually, if I'm only traveling 2 days a week into the city centre, or I'm only going for a couple of journeys a week, then I could see it could be quite easy for me to make this decision that the car is just not an affordable choice at that point, and I'm paying to have something on my drive, which I probably am doing already, to be honest, when I think about the costs. But I just wondered whether there was any work you knew of in that area, or any research around that, because it could be a real game changer for shared transport when people aren't making that same journey every single day.
Yes, it's a really good point, because actually this piece of shared transport is a really important part of the jigsaw, and that's why we really encourage a sort of shift from private transport to public shared and active travel. I think you said a number of really important, interesting comments there, and I had a picture as you were talking of where we need to get to, because essentially we need to get to a stage, and I don't know how we deliver this, and of course we have to think about people who haven't got a smartphone. But we need to get to a point where you reach for your phone rather than your car keys. You know, where you're wanting to travel somewhere. If we can, I mean, that's where platforms such like mobility as a service that are evolving, and they're still going through their sort of development stages. But that potentially could provide part of the solution in terms of for what you're saying, in terms of bringing that shared. Technology could help us. Here, I think, we need to make the most of those developments. But that mindset shift, and it's brilliant actually that younger people we know are buying cars, less straight away. It's less of the state. It certainly isn't the status symbol that it was perhaps in years ago. So there is a bit of a shift already, but it's how do we really get it so that the default isn't the car, it's public shared active travel. It's all the different options, all the different ways that are, in fact, as you say, ultimately you save yourself money, because if you look at the cost of owning a car, and I think something horrendous like 96% of the car fleet is stationary most of the time or something. I mean, it's such a waste of, and think of all the embedded carbon in that as well. So not to mention the costs. So I suppose in summary, it's having a picture of something different, visualizing a kind of a transport system, as Mayor Jamie Driscoll was saying, where imagine life where you don't have to depend on a car, or you don't have to own a car. So it's usership, not ownership. It's sharing and getting, and in fact, if I'm going off on another tangent and I'm conscious of time, but road pricing could help in that. In that if we look at if we're looking at having sort of high occupancy lanes where people are encouraged, you see places around the world where you can get into these much faster routes if there are more people in the car. So that would encourage car sharing as well. So however we do it, we just got to get away from a single occupancy drivers driving around and creating a lot of pollution and congestion and making everyone miserable.
Thank you, Claire. On behalf of the committee, it's been absolutely brilliant, for you to be involved in our meeting today. We really appreciate that you've taken the time. We have got massive ambition for a mass transit system, integrated public transport system. We just need to be bold. And it's great that we've got our portfolio holders here today that are leading on all those agendas across the district. So thank you so much for your time, and hopefully catch up soon.
Thank you very much. And once again, thank you for the opportunity. It's been brilliant to have this discussion. Thank you. We'll keep in touch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye.
So we will move swiftly on to item number 6, which is the COVID response recovery. We've got to try and make up time now when we've got a busy agenda. I'd just like to, at this point, thank all the operators and the teams at WYCA who have been working to maintain the levels of services. It's been a really challenging couple of weeks, especially our schools teams. who've done an absolutely brilliant job, and the operators on keeping the lights on and keeping the system going. So I'm going to hand over to Dave on this agenda item. Dave Pearson.
Right, thank you, Chair, and I'll pass on those good wishes to our teams and bus operators. This report really is a bit of an update report, and I'm happy to take questions. Really, I mean, I think the two things I would pull out. Firstly, we are in a sort of second wave of lockdown restrictions, and we've seen public transport use fall a little as a result of that, but they're very different restrictions to the spring ones, and therefore, you know, we've got bus usage is between 40 and 50%, having been up to about 50% in October. So we've had a shrinkage in bus use and rail use over that time. I think the second point I just wanted to point out, really, in terms of the recommendations, is that members will recall that we put an emergency delegation in to make any decisions we need to make in between committees. And I think we're now in the new way of working, so much as that we don't need that delegation. So recommendation 8.2 is to rescind that decision-making arrangement. So I'll stop there and obviously answer any questions that members have.
Thank you, David. I think it was Councillor Bolt who raised that, so that's been answered. Any questions or comments? Councillor Bolt, Councillor Buckley and Councillor Caffrey, can you take your old hands down, please, if that's possible?
That's a bit rude.
Sorry.
That's a bit rude saying that they're old hands.
Retire their hands from the screen.
Sorry, Chair, I've done it, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for that, Dave. Yes. I mean, regarding governance arrangements, I'm aware that some authorities are resuming actual meetings. The Lord Mayor of Hull and Admiral of the Humber, as Steve is rightly known, has handed over to his successor in a meeting in, I think it's the Guildhall they call it, in Hull. So is there any look at when we as a Transport Committee may be getting back to having actual meetings? But this raises issues on several points. I know, because of the difficulty of IT, I've had to chop a couple of trees down, and Kirklees thankfully have been paying for the printing at home. But again, that's an issue that at the moment members are not getting seeing committee papers on screen, which for some may present problems. But I think the sooner we can get back to anything appearing normal, and if other authorities are managing to get around actual meetings, then I think we as a transport authority ought to be doing that.
I think obviously we're refurbing the building at the moment. At this moment in time, I think the building is due to be completed in March, so we would have to find another venue. I know other councils are having hybrid meetings. We could look at that, but it would still need to be on Zoom. We've got, I think, around 20 people who have joined us on the meeting today, so the public need to be involved. We'll certainly look at it, Councillor Bolt, and
Thank you, Kim.
Right to the next meeting. Okay, Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just to agree with what Councillor Bolt just said there, I think it's very, very important that we do get back to proper meetings. Not just for practical reasons, but for all the mental health problems and loneliness, which was mentioned earlier. I think it's very important. But on the practical side of it, this agenda runs to 268 pages. Now, I find it very, very hard to look at that number of pages on a computer screen. And I think, I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And it detracts from people's ability to concentrate on the meeting. But the question I wanted to ask was just to clarify something on the, which I think Dave probably didn't mention, or actually I think he did. The levels of patronage numbers. In the papers it mentions this is running at 55%. And at first reading, I thought, well, given that the buses can only take 50%, that means the number is 26%. But actually, I feel that he probably means 55% of where it was before this all started. So perhaps you could just clarify that, please.
Dave.
Yeah, sorry if that's not clear. I think Councillor Buckley is quite right. Generally, buses can carry about 50% of of the number of passengers that it normally carry on a bus. We have been all the way through the pandemic, and the graphs that you've got in front of you do this. Try to express the percentage against with the same week the previous year in terms of the numbers of people we're seeing, just to give members and everybody a feel for basically what the gap is between if 2019 can be called normal, then and what we're seeing against that sort of normal. But that's a sort of rounding all the numbers up and comparing it with the same time last time. So yeah, it did edge above 50%. And there have been odd situations, particularly in October, not so much at the moment, where buses were leaving passengers full because they'd exceeded their capacity. What we have been doing with bus operators very carefully is to make sure those situations are sort of managed so that the frequency of bus services at particularly the late afternoon time when schools and students are going home, we try and minimize that as much as possible. But hopefully that explains the figures.
Okay, any more questions or comments? None in the chat. Okay, so can we move the recommendation?
Second, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll move on to item 7, which is the concessionary bus travel for under 19. So the Transport Committee have been working on this for, I would say, around 2 years, 18 months, and the operators. So really pleased to be introducing this today. I think at the heart of everything that we do, we want a fair deal for our young people. And at a time when families are struggling, it's great to be having the hop, skip and jump for young people, the 60p fare, single ticket on the agenda today. And my only comment would be that obviously we've got COVID restrictions, but if we could implement this, I think as soon as possible, I think myself and the Transport Committee would really appreciate that to help these families at this time. So I'm just going to introduce Dave and Andrew Bradley, who has been at the forefront of this work, are going to now speak to this item. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Chair. And Andrew's done all the work. But yes,
is it not charging up?
Is that I think what's presented to you today is a little bit of a sort of technicality in the sense that we have this legal document called a concession travel scheme. The committee need to approve the amendment of that, and that's one of the things that's recommended to you. We've done a lot of work with bus operators. We've done a lot of work in looking at fare structures to get a fare structure that is both simple, which is what young people asked us to do, but also to for most people to be a slight reduction in the cost of what they pay. So as the chair has said, we would want to do this as soon as we're able to, in terms of encouraging young people back onto the bus and as part of our COVID recovery arrangements. But obviously, as we sit here right now, not really knowing what's going to happen in terms of COVID restrictions over the next fortnight, it's difficult to put a date on it. So we put a provisional date on it in February, and we'll work with that and keep the committee informed if we can bring it in sooner, or if there's another date that makes more sense. So I'll stop there, and Andrew and I can answer any questions that you've got. Councillor Groves, you're on mute.
Councillor Cahill and Councillor de Gaulle. You'd think we'd have got that one by now, weren't you, taking yourself off mute?
That's all right, Chair. I mean, really, I just wanted to welcome this because I know it's something that has been a lot of hard work and something that people have worked on. And I already was going to welcome it, but then I thought the figure we were quoted earlier of 87% of young job seekers not having access to any other form of transport but public transport really brings this home. And what we do know is that one of the key barriers for young people getting on the bus is that uncertainty, which is difficult at that time, working out, well, I've already worked out where I can get to on the bus. How do I know how much it's going to be when I get on? How do you pay it? And all of that kind of thing. As a first-time bus user, that does stop people getting on the bus, and we have to listen to that regardless of whether that affects us. So I think it's just great to see, and I'd endorse, certainly there should be something in there that gives us the power to ensure that operators are doing this. And as we come out of where we've got to at the moment, we're going to see young people wanting to get back to further education, to opportunities, to jobs, to culture, to accessing, to being able to see their friends. And it would be amazing for, as soon as they were allowed to do that, for them to be able to see their friends all over the cities and towns of West Yorkshire for a flat fee. So yeah, completely support this, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor de Gon.
Yes, very much welcome it, and I'm sure as we come out of this sort of current situation, that it's going to be crucial for public transport to promote it to young people, you know, as a lifestyle habit. I'm just sort of looking through, and one question which I had was whether the intention would be, I'm sure operators prefer to try and drive as much as possible onto smart ticketing, like people paying either using a mobile or an app rather than having to, or contactless, whether that will be part of the feature of this, but also conscious that there may be a change in terms of work patterns, that people maybe traveling to work 2 or 3 days a week rather than, you know, 5 days a week, whether there's scope within this to have a sort of like a carnet type thing of 10 days rather than having to have a weekly or a monthly ticket, have one which is so many journeys within a month. You know, whether something like that would be cater for potentially more home working and more flexible working.
Andrew Bradley, do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, certainly I can do. In terms, thank you for your comments, councillors. In terms of the comment about there's one point I'd like to make, and that is just that in terms of the flat fare, the amounts we're setting on the single fares, it's capped rather than flat, because it may be, and some operators have come forward to us to say, well, you're saying £1.20 is the amount that you will reimburse us if the fare is up to that amount, but some operators have actually come back to us and said, well, no, we want to charge £1 for that amount. And obviously if they can charge less, we don't want to stop them from doing that. On the preferential rates for different means of payment, at the minute that's not something that we've included, but it's not to say that it isn't something that we wouldn't consider moving forward. And on the suggestion about carnets, etc., so for the M-Card My Day product, you can buy that in 1, 2, 5, 10, and that gives you the flexibility you need. So that's available now and will continue to be available moving forward.
If I could just add to what Andrew said there, just for Councillor de Gon's question around young people and payment. We are in the process, and we mentioned it later on in the papers, of launching the M-Card mobile app. And one of the things which we want to do with that, which is an app-based ticketing scheme similar to what some of the bus operators have, is to introduce a facility whereby parents can actually buy tickets and then pass them on to the mobile phones of the young person, because I think the barrier to contactless type payment for young people is that they don't have bank accounts in the same form that adults do. So that's a facility which hopefully we can bring in sometime next year as well.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? I can't see any.
Yep, I'd wave, Kim. Hello.
All right, so I've got Councillor Bowe and Councillor Engel.
Yeah, thanks. Just a clarity, if we can. We're talking about a possible introduction in February. What implication does a recommendation 8.2 have that the concessionary scheme is amended and comes into force in April? Does that create any conflict with 8.3, that the new fare structure?
No, I think we want to implement it as soon as possible, but obviously with COVID restrictions.
Yes.
Sorry, Dave.
Just to clarify Councillor Ball's question, technically the travel scheme, we would bring it in the 1st of April simply because in that legal document is the basis under which we reimburse bus operators, and so we've lined that up with the end of the financial year because of the sort of the administrative element around that. But we have had discussions with the bus operators because, as Councillor Grove said, we were hoping to do this back in September when we had our meeting of the Transport Committee, if you recall, immediately before COVID hit us. Then we actually took a paper on this with a plan to get it to September. We've had to push that back because promoting public transport use amongst young people at this moment in time is not an easy thing to do. So we've got essentially agreement with the bus operators that when the moment is right, we will do it.
Great, thanks.
Councillor Engel.
Thank you. I'm going to show my age a bit here because the saver strips of olden days are something that's popped into my head recently. Now, my personal situation, we live in Bradford. My eldest is now studying at university in Huddersfield and living down there in halls. However, she's doing a degree in youth and community work, and due to there not being enough youth service placements within Huddersfield, she's actually got her placement in Bradford. So at least 2 days a week, she needs to buy a Yorkshire Day Rider to come and do her placement work with the youth service in Bradford and then go back down to Huddersfield. I suggested to her, maybe it's better that she gets a weekly or a monthly pass. And she's like, well, no, because that costs so much more. But this is really expensive. And it just made me think, saver strips. I know it's kind of low tech and everything, but a similar sort of deal might really work for people like her. And I know she won't be the only one in that sort of a situation. You know, a lot of young people, despite the economic situation and the traditional student jobs not being available, certainly a lot of her friends and course mates do have jobs that are not necessarily within walking distance of where they are. And again, with that course that she's doing, a lot of them are not doing their placements where the university is and where they live.
Chair, if I can just explain this, and Andrew might add as well. This report predominantly deals with under 19s, but a similar sort of point exists. The modern day equivalent to saver strip is what's in table A of the report on page 27, My Day, because that essentially is people buying a day's travel, and they can buy several days travel. And I think we absolutely understand the need and the emerging need that people are going to have. If they're only going to travel certain days of the week, they're only going to want to pay for the days of travel. And so the day ticket option is the one. Now, as Councillor Engel point out, that option's available for both in terms of the ANCAR products and in terms of bus operator products. Now, this is probably a separate conversation as to the relative price point comparison between the weekly and monthly costs and the day costs. But essentially, people can buy a day's travel and I think the emerging predominance of apps as the way in which people buy travel sort of takes us back to the kitchen saver strip type of world.
Thank you, Dave. I was thinking it was Kaching, but
no, if I could just add, Chair, just very briefly, I think that, as Dave said, this deals with or addresses in some part the under-19 issue, but both Councillor Carlisle and Councillor Engel have mentioned sort of the student market or job, people doing training who are over the age of 19, and that's something that's very much on our agenda that we will certainly come back to.
Any more questions or comments? As Andrew says, the work continues. I know Andrew's working very closely with the DWP, and we're working with Transport for the North on the integrated ticketing. So we'll bring further reports back, but the work continues. So if we could accept the recommendations, we can move on to the next item agenda. Yeah, okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to put the connectivity strategy after the bus network. So we're just going to go straight on to item 9, which is the bus network sustainability and post-COVID COVID recovery. This will hopefully help us in terms of strengthening our partnerships with bus operators through an enhanced partnership proposal that has gone to the DfT. And this would help us stabilise the West Yorkshire bus network, which plays a crucial role in our economy and build first-class bus service for passengers. So this is the second part of the strategic paper of the review of the bus review network that you've all been involved in. We had workshops on this, over 18 hours on both and 18 hours on the next paper. So I'm hoping that you're all cited on it, but happy to take any questions and comments. I'm just going to hand over to Helen Ellerton, who's been at the forefront of this work, and Dave Pearson for questions and comments. So any questions or comments?
Chair, shall I just
yes.
And obviously Helen can assist with questions as well. Just to bring members up to date a little bit, because this is a fairly fast moving situation in terms of funding for buses around COVID. We were expecting the government spending review announcements next week. And one of the sort of key elements that we put forward to government is that the funding that's currently being supporting the bus network nationally through COVID is devolved to the combined authority, so that we can manage the COVID recovery and the financial recovery of the bus service locally. So we wait to hear the outcome of that. The enhanced partnership proposal, which is in the papers, which the paper sort of sets out our steps towards, is a formal position within the Bus Services Act, and our discussions with government would indicate that that is their preferred legal mechanism to manage a devolved funded COVID recovery situation. So that we're sort of setting out how we would move towards that enhanced partnership model. So I'm sure Helen and I are happy to take any questions that members have.
So any questions around the partnership model, the prioritisation of funding and targeting communities? Councillor Ball?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and welcome the work that's coming on this. Just looking at the plans in particular, obviously for Kirklees. Yeah, if we refer to these diagrams, I mean, obviously the alleged high frequency network on page 79 highlights the deficiency which I've mentioned before. Oh, somebody must be coming to the door. That from Cooper Bridge up to Bursell, there is no direct route towards Leeds. The lines then veer off through Ravensthorpe, Dewsbury, which again, reflecting on what we've talked about before, if we are going to get people out of the cars, we need to be having high frequency express services between major conurbations, so Huddersfield to Leeds. You know, people are not going to get out of the car if they're not convenient for the rail station. And as I've said before, yeah, I will happily go from the Murfield-Robertstown intersection into Leeds on a push bike and get there before the bus operators do. That's the farcical situation. So we need to look at that. The future growth, I think there might be, excuse me, there might be an error on here, because on page 83, according to this, Cooper Bridge is an employment growth and skills area. Well, the local plan for Kirklees took out the industrial allocation from Cooper Bridge. There is actually a major growth area, West Yorkshire Enterprise Zone, probably 1.5 miles north of Cooper Bridge towards Heckmondwike, Murfield 25, and that's one of those areas which is not served by any buses. Major, one of the biggest employers in the area, an aircraft supply company that's moved on there. Caddocks are developing, there's 160 odd houses, and there isn't even a bus service goes past it. This is one of those areas where, the 400 metres to a bus stop is probably as a crow flies, not as a passenger moves. So, and growing, again, that's reflected in growing the demand on page 85, where the red light talks about increased service frequency and bus priority, but doesn't clarify whether these are direct routes or circuitous. So again, if we're going to have a partnership with the bus company, if we're going to work towards having carbon reduction, air quality improvements, let's see a service not only that's serving so that people can get to employment, such as the retail area at Birstall, which I know Chair often Leeds tries to claim. They say IKEA's Leeds and things like that. It's actually in Kirklees. So a major employment area, but it's also a major retail area. And surely we want people to be getting there and back on public transport. But going the other way as well, as and when things resume, we want to get rid of that farcical situation where the A62 near Huddersfield is gridlocked whenever the football club are playing at home. Although what used to be 20,000 people when they're in the Premier League, it may be a bit less now, but we need to be facilitating that so that they can go to and from the matches on public transport and not have single occupancy cars. And that needs to be the genuine partnership with bus operators to working towards our objectives. But I say the clarity on the mapping, and in particular the situation on Cooper Bridge, which is not an employment area for the next generation. Thanks.
Okay, Dave, Helen, do you want to come back in on that? And those, I don't know all those schemes in detail, but Councillor Bolt did feed into the bus workshop. So if we can just go back and look at the feedback that he put into that to make sure that it's reflected.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. I think we will take those back and just look at that information and just understand if there's been a bit of a quirk in how we've presented the information. So, but yeah, thank you, Councillor Bolt.
Any more questions?
Just to add to what Helen said, I think, and I know we talked about it when we had the workshop with members as well, is this work so far is to identify the broad flows based upon where we think development is going to influence bus travel. It's not looking at it on a route by route, line by line sort of basis. That's to come in this piece of work. What we're trying to get to grips with is which sectors of each district are the ones where we need to really sort of focus on bus travel. And if you look at the Kirklees sectors, then clearly the northeast sector of Kirklees is the one, because that's the one where, as Councillor Bolt pointed out, there's quite a lot of job growth.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions or comments on this? I feel it is the right direction of travel, that we're going to have these tube style networks.
Is that a pun?
Councillor Bolt?
Sorry, was that a pun? It's the right direction of travel.
Yeah, definitely. We've come a long way. We've got obviously all this bus work, the fares, the Rail Vision on the agenda today, and we can't underestimate the amount of work that you've all put into this, but also that the officers have put into this to get West Yorkshire into the 21st century, and really stand by what the public are wanting, which is a connected network that actually is growing rather than shrinking. So I think it's a good report. We know we've got a lot more to do on those secondary routes, and I look forward to it progressing. So are we happy to accept the recommendations? Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Really pleased now to welcome the Real Vision paper. As I said, elected members gave us 18 hours of the time. This will be something that will obviously be part of the connectivity strategy. It will go out to get the public's views. That's really important that their views are fed into any strategy. But just because of the interaction that we had with elected members, I really feel this Real Vision has already got that ground up feel about it. And that's really good that it's not just a top-down approach. So I'm really pleased to welcome the Real Vision team and thank them for their hard work. But what I would say on this one is we are dependent on an MPR, we are dependent on HS2, we're dependent on TransPennine upgrade, we're dependent on the electrification of the Calder Valley line, and successive governments haven't given us that investment. In fact, the only people I think that we've had the investment was somebody called the Victorians, which is 170 years ago. So a lot of this depends on the big projects, and is still campaigning for those big project schemes to come forward at government. But this vision really does show people how we're thinking about not just cities, but towns and communities. So I'm going to hand over to, I'm not sure if it's Jack or James that's on the call today. You can see Jack's name.
Hi, Councillor Groves. It's James Nutt here, and I'm joined by Jack, which is great, Jack Rogers, who I'll be giving him his credit. He's been the architect of this Rail Vision document. So thank you to Jack. First of all, as you mentioned, Councillor Groves, this is the first product of the new West Yorkshire Rail Strategy, and I'd like to extend my thanks to all the members of the committee who spent a significant amount of time inputting to this document. So thank you. We are seeking your endorsement today for this draft revision. And I think I'd like to sort of finish before we move on to questions and comments. During the workshops, there was a lot of mention of the COVID-19 crisis and what the long-term impacts will be on the way that people might use public transport in future and use the railway. For me, and I hope this comes across in the document, this is about hopefully shaping the way that our railway can serve West Yorkshire in the future and respond to the COVID-19 crisis, both in the short term, but also the long term. And we really need rail to play a much more important role as part of that integrated transport network to help us both economically, but in terms of supporting the environment as well. So I'll leave it there, Chair, and myself and Jack here to answer any questions.
Questions or comments, please? Sorry, I got thrown out of the meeting then. I'm just trying to see people's hands. Councillor Ball?
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report, James and Jack. Rail stations on page 87. I'm pleased to see it's a priority. I'd like to sort of ask on that then, that on the first bullet point, passenger experience, that we will make our rail stations attractive, pleasant, etc. What representation has WYCA made to Network Rail with regards to the TransPennine route upgrade to make Murfield railway station attractive, pleasant, well routed in the community, etc.? Because from the information I've seen from Network Rail, it's going to be another basic windswept, stand on your platform and get cold station, which for a major intersection, and the only one in Kirklees which has a direct link to London, I think it deserves better. It ought to be treated as a major intersection. We ought to be pushing for facilities on there for retail opportunities so that we can get some revenue in. And again, if we can increase opportunities for interconnection from bus transport or improved parking, then we will be getting cars off the road. So yeah, support this, but yeah, we need to see evidence of action that Network Rail have been lobbied to make stations as part of the TransPennine route upgrade fit for use in the 21st century.
Thank
Do you want me to come back, Chair? Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Bolt. So we are pleased to report engaged in the Transpennine Route Upgrade Programme through my colleague Rebecca Chung, but also working with Dave Pearson and colleagues. And we have made strong representations that all stations on the line in West Yorkshire should come up to an absolutely modern standard, and including being fully Equality Act compliant as one example. It's to our mind, it's no good just improving the rail service on the route and the infrastructure on which that's based. You've got to also have the other key part of the jigsaw upgraded as well, which is the way people get on and off the network, which is our railway stations, and make them attractive and modern gateways. So we are absolutely engaged with Network Rail and the Department for Transport on that very issue.
Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? I can't see any more hands raised. Okay, so are we happy to accept the recommendations?
So moved, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm having a few technical issues here.
Formally moved, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we will now move on to the connectivity strategy. Has everyone got the mics turned off? I've got somebody's phone ringing in the background. No? Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. We'll move on to the connectivity strategy. Again, there was a workshop held with members last week. So I believe Tom Gifford is here and Liz Hunter to introduce this item.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, as the report sets out, there's an awful lot of work going into the connectivity strategy, and you've heard two of the main items, the bus and rail, both will layer up to complete the connectivity work. Given that you all, thank you very much for your time into the workshop last week. So I wasn't proposing to go over too much more detail because the team are now busy working through your comments and questions that you gave to us last week on the connectivity strategy. So thank you for your input on that. And we, subject to us continuing the work on this, we're aiming to talk to the combined authority, and then we're looking around the most appropriate time to publish. So, like, again, just to say thanks for your involvement so far in the workshop, and we'll be taking on board your feedback. Happy to take questions on the process.
So, question, Councillor Ball.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I think connectivity is the key issue, and I'm hoping that there is some connectivity communication with local authorities and with WYCA. Page 36 talks about mass transit being a bold new transport mode. Well, obviously we've had various parts of mass transit. The only bold new one I've seen was Richard Branson sending everybody down a little tube, which is something out of James Bond. But one of the mass transit projects which was mooted was the Bradford to Dewsbury one. And in terms of connectivity and communication, I'd like some clarity on how that's being progressed at the moment, and then how that links across to something that we'll consider later on item 13. Because the mass rapid transit system from Bradford to Dewsbury was talking about using the Spen Valley Greenway, one of the most successful active travel corridors in the country. And that's been talked about enhanced later, where we're talking about widening the Greenway and putting lighting down. How does that work if it's going to be a mass transit corridor? Is there any conflict of that? And presumably the two elements within WYCA and making sure that it's complementary and not contradictory. Thank you.
Absolutely. Tom? Always?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer, because I think, Councillor Bott, you kindly asked this a similar kind of question, and it's really good to keep the focus on our integration between modes, and that's certainly what we want the connectivity strategy to do. The Swin Valley Greenway obviously is as an important link already is not something we would want to jeopardise. So I think as we develop our mass transit plans, we'll be looking at how we can how they can complement rather than replace.
Okay, any more questions or comments on this? Obviously, really an important overarching document detailing the delivery plan for the long-term pipeline of transport. Because you've all been so involved and taking it, that you're happy with the paper and happy to support the recommendation. Okay.
Yeah, moved.
Thank you. So item 11 is a paper that updates members on developer contributions, started over, I think it was around 18 months ago. And there's some key outcomes of advice in this note. It's around the clarity on the combined authorities' role, consistency on consultation in planning applicants, types and scales of transport interventions, and combined authority, how we support the best practice, and the transit orientated planning that we were discussing with Claire earlier. I'm not sure if Michael is on the call yet.
Yes, I'm here.
Michael, so Michael has done all of this work, an excellent piece of work. So I'm going to hand over straight over to you, Michael.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I work in our policy and strategy team, and as Councillor Groves has said, I've been working on a piece of work to one, look at developer contributions generally and see how we can improve our communications in terms of our interaction with planning authorities and developer contributions. So I won't go through the paper line by line, but in terms of some highlights that we've found, the developer contributions over the last 12 months has dropped off quite significantly. We think it's to do with COVID and general viability issues, but we're going to kind of continue to look at the reasons for that. But we've also the main piece of this work, and what we're looking for endorsement really from this group, is a developer guide that we've been working on. Now there's been some kind of comment in the past about our positioning on this. We're obviously not a planning authority, but we do offer authorities advice on planning applications. So what the guide sets out to do is set out some principles about how and when we will comment on planning applications. And then it's I don't know whether you've had a chance to have a look at the link, but there's an online it's an online guide which allows us to put mapping information in there. So there's some content in there for both developers and officers in the districts to use themselves on public transport and accessibility. And then it goes on to almost articulate a little bit more clearer our kind of intervention menu. So it starts to explore different types of intervention that we would recommend that developers implement in planning applications. Obviously, every planning application is different, so every application doesn't need to do everything, but it's certainly trying to instill a bit more consistency in what we're asking for and when. So I'll leave it there. I'm quite happy to take any questions or talk you through anything more detail if you need that.
So any questions or comments? Councillor Swift, I apologise. Have I missed one of your hands? Because it's
No. There's only the one hand, and it's only just been put up. Thank you, Chair. It's firstly to say it's an excellent piece of work, and thanks to Michael and anyone else involved. I just wanted to make a comment about the wider context of planning, because I think quite often by the time the actual planning application comes in, and whether it's someone like Michael or his opposite numbers within our local authorities, I think quite often by that time it's in many ways too late. You know, we've dealt with an item that had all these nice little maps, which were about how much of our developments are less than 400 meters from a high density bus route. Now, I think the reality is that when it comes to the planning application, quite often the way that the land is already designated for development is quite often in a way that makes it really quite difficult, to achieve good standards of walking access to actual good quality bus routes. So I just wanted to kind of flag up the importance of advice, comment, assessment at that earlier stage, at the local plan stage, when the land's actually being allocated, so that there's some reasonable prospect that land is actually allocated in a way that lends itself to extension, to either to good access to existing bus routes, or in a genuine way lends itself to amendment or alteration of bus routes. So I just wanted to flag that particular one up. But once again, thank you very much indeed for a very good piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you for that point. That was very well made, Councillor Swift. Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and again, welcome this. I think, yeah, it's probably the right direction, as well as we're looking towards future governance, that if we go towards a mayoral authority and things and changes, yeah, we need to be influencing travel behaviour through the planning process. And as has been mentioned, we are a consultee, but I think the WYCA and the transport body should be a robust consultee. And there was a situation, or there's an ongoing planning application in my area, a planning application which, strangely enough, went to committee 12 months ago, and they still haven't resolved the flooding issue, so it's coming back again. 700 metres from the train station, but the request was for bus-only M cards, given the paucity of bus services and the fact that many people who are moving into this almost town centre development may be commuters. The request there and the suggestion should be quite strongly for all mode M cards. Yeah, let's say 700 metres from a railway station, it's entirely plausible that people would want that. If the developer and the local planning authority decide not to accept that request, then at least it's on record that the Transport Authority have sought that for the improvement of our communities. And I don't know, we talk a lot in here about Section 106. I don't know if there's any consideration of how, if it comes about community infrastructure levies, will change that, whether there's something which could be more beneficial by having a sum per dwelling that comes towards public transport and things. But yeah, we certainly do need to be pushing for all aspects that developers should be making developments better environmentally friendly, more accessible to public transport, because as we've said so many times, yeah, we just can't keep putting private vehicles onto the road. Thanks.
I agree. Thank you, Councillor Wall. Any more questions or comments on this? Well, just like to thank Michael, because I know that he's put an awful lot of work into this report over many months. So thank you, Michael. And can we accept the recommendations? And get any yes. So thank you, Michael. Okay. So item number 12 is Leeds City Region Transport Update. This includes the reports from Transport for the North and Rail North Committee. And we have had the £10 million Active Travel Emergency Fund announced at last. I felt that young people who were looking at that might have grown up by the time it had come, but there we go. We've got that funding at last. I've got Mark Roberts is on the call. I don't know if you want to give us an update from Transport for the North, Mark. We've obviously got a lot of projects, that we're waiting to hear about, the schemes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can. The papers in this pack refer to the Transport for the North meeting that happened in September. There was also one that happened just 2 days ago on Wednesday this week. So I can sort of share the agenda items and the topics for discussion. A lot of these parts of the meetings were restricted and took place in private. And so with this being a public forum, I just need to be mindful of the confidential nature of some of those. But for the Transport to the North board meeting, Councillor Judith Blake attended to represent West Yorkshire. I attended to represent the Leeds City Region LEP. The agenda items were a lot on annual governance, an audit, and also a year-to-date budget revision and a finance update, obviously, as there's been significant impact with COVID-19. And then in the private section of the meeting, there was a discussion of Northern Powerhouse Rail and the preferred route, the preferred way forward, and the phasing plan. What I can share is a press release that came through yesterday, where there is agreement from Transport for the North on the preferred network. This was announced. It's supported by all of the officers for sort of West Yorkshire, and we endorsed that with appropriate caveats, because we're very clear on the ideal routes that we want to have and the investment that we want to have, and that the minimum viable isn't a real alternative for us. Then there was also a partnership board meeting the same day. Councillor Susan Hinchcliffe attended, representing West Yorkshire. I attended representing the LEP, and those conversations were around some Transpennine strategic road studies, and also a business planning update. Again, that section of the meeting took place in private, so it wouldn't be appropriate to discuss sort of further on this. But obviously, myself, and I'm sure Councillor Judith Blake and Councillor Susan Hinchcliffe can sort of make ourselves available to discuss with any of the members if there are specific items that we want to talk about and discuss further.
Brilliant, yeah, and I'm sure we can ask for an update of what can be shared, so it would be really useful. Can I just ask a question, Matt? Was there anything on the Acceleration Council? Because it felt like a big headline, and then there's been nothing since.
It did, to be honest, Chair. It felt like that. I'm not aware of any further meetings of the Acceleration Council.
Okay.
There was a meeting with Secretary of State Grant Shapps with members of the Transport for the North board, which was very much talking about the Transport for the North working in partnership with this Acceleration Council. The key deadline at the moment seems to be the Department for Transport's integrated rail plan, and getting the feedback and a formal letter and proposal for the Transport for the North board is the key deadline that they're sort of working on right now, and that's happening imminently. Thank you, Matt. That's been really useful. I don't know if any of the officers want to update to this report.
Yes, Chair. I was just going to add to what Mark was saying about Transport for the North. Transport for the North has separately approached us regarding their bid to government for integrated smart ticketing, seeking our support to that. I think we've talked at this committee before about the integrated smart ticketing programme at Transport for the North does align with the combined authorities policies, and in particular some of the capability that Transport for the North is seeking to fund would support our COVID recovery plans. So with your agreement, Chair, we'll support that.
Yeah. So do we think possibly that the M card might be a pilot for the integrated ticketing?
Well, I think what we've always said to Transport for the North is that we have a strong M card product in the region, but we also have a strong governance around it, and that's a good way of actually piloting new innovation, because we've got a mechanism that we work very closely with bus and rail operators to administer ticketing schemes.
Yeah, I did attend a meeting with Transport for the North, and I did get a sense that we're just not moving as quickly as we should be on this one. It's been like 3 years, 118 million. Around that figure.
Yes.
The public seeing that and thinking we can't get that ticket, and we've got an M card that would do it. Okay, so any more questions or comments on that one? It's frustrating. Councillor Bolt.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and interesting times ahead. Couple of points on this. If I could just suggest a grammatical correction. On the Transpennine route upgrade, page 247 on item 2.19, it says 2 phases of consultation. In my understanding, consultation is when you ask somebody a question and then take it into consideration, which is not the case from Network Rail. When Network Rail have been having meetings, they've been terming those loosely as public engagement. The public turn up, speak, and then, as far as I can tell, Network Rail ignore them. I'm not aware that anything has ever been shaped by what people have been saying at those meetings. I read with interest the press statements about Northern Powerhouse Rail, And the emphasis now seems to be that we're going for a Bradford Central station rather than at one time we were talking about a parkway. And I think if we could have something on that at a future meeting about how NPR will interact. I mean, I don't know if Councillor McBride has got any insight into how Kirklees will interact with NPR, but if it's coming Calder Valley and then across to Bradford Central, clearly, yeah, there's no direct connection or connectivity. If it had been a parkway station somewhere around about Lowmore, or that was muted at one time, then that was on the borders of Kirklees and accessible. But town centre stations present issues of connectivity from the Kirklees residents of getting into NPR. So we need to look at how all areas can benefit from it.
Okay, I'm just going to bring Liz. Would you like to come in on that one, on Councillor Bolt's point? And I think we can bring something back at a future meeting. It's obviously still early days. This work that Transport for the North are doing on NPR.
Thanks, and yes, I think maybe we should. I think the on TRU we probably should have used the word engagement rather than consultation. So I think that's what they're currently doing at the moment. So on NPR, I'm very happy to bring something back to a future meeting. I think as we've been talking about today, there's that real debate about trying to get people out of their cars, and city centres can provide real access and interchange via public transport. We are really pushing for Transport and route upgrade to deliver significant benefits for Kirklees, both to Leeds and Manchester. And we're very clear that we need that delivered in full, and for those benefits to be delivered separately from then kind of NPR, because TRU is vitally important in the short term.
Okay, and on Transparent, I think it's fair to report back that the customer work stream sits with Transport for the North. However, we've approached Network Rail and they've got an officer working with us at a really local level, so that we can make sure that all the disruption, displacement and all the work that we're fully briefed on it, especially Kirklees members. The dates haven't been set up for the first meeting of that, but Network Rail have been communicating with us, and we're going to set up a working group on that. Councillor Sutherland.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mark, for that update. It was really useful actually to have an inside view on what was happening in the Transport for the North meetings. Similar to Martin, I just wanted to make a plug for Calderdale to be remembered in this as well. What we currently see is a line that runs through Calderdale, which will provide, definitely some benefits to people in the area, but they might not. Well, it doesn't look like there is going to be a stop in Calderdale, and the people on the Calder Valley line have been waiting for some years for electrification of the Calder Valley route, and that seems to be one that often drops off the national agenda, despite being often plugged at a national level when it suits. So just a real call that we need to consider the commuters in that valley town, in those valley towns, especially if they're going to see a new line running through the area. They're going to hopefully, want to see some benefits on their line too.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that not only Northern Transpennine and all the operators and Network Rail have been talking about the electrification of Calder Valley, which is really welcomed. But you're right, we just need to keep it at the forefront. So.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor McBride, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, people are talking as though there's some clear line coming from government. Actually, the reality is exactly the opposite. You may remember originally the proposal for Transpennine was a £5 billion scheme, which the government then modified to say, oh, well, we probably will deliver on 2.5 billion. Most recently, and exultantly, we had Grant Shapps saying that he was going to deliver something over 500 million on Transpennine, which means a curtailing of what was being proposed in the first case. So we have in the first place. So we have no guarantee, even in terms of what Grant Shapps most recently said, that we're going to get full delivery of the link between Huddersfield and Ravensthorpe. And yet that was previously a key part of the whole plan. We are completely up in the air about this because the government hasn't made its mind up, as usual. Bear in mind, this this dallying has been going on for at least 18 years, almost 10, and we're still waiting for this limited TransPennine improvement. It's 5 billion. If we look at the alternative link through Bradford, which is the wider aspiration, you're talking in the region of between 15 and 20 billion. So God knows whatever decisions ever going to be made on that, so, and how the two might fit together. There's no clarity whatsoever.
Well, I think we've been waiting 170 years for investment in the north on rail. Liz, when do we expect the IRP or the NIC announcements?
That's a good question, Councillor Groves. So the government have said they will publish the integrated rail plan before Christmas. Obviously, the government are quite busy at the moment with other things. So we haven't heard whether that will change or not, but we'll see what happens if it does come out. The National Infrastructure Commission, as colleagues will know, has been looking at a rail needs assessment, and we understand that they'll be submitting their kind of final proposals to government, I think towards the end of this month, in order to inform that integrated rail plan. So it is imminent, but I haven't had a specific date from government as yet.
Okay. Councillor Swift, have you got your hand up?
I have, Chair, yes. Just strongly supporting what everybody's been saying over TransPennine upgrade, but just kind of noting with a bit of a degree of disappointment that it really doesn't seem to be given very much priority in terms of the statements issued by Transport for the North. They don't really seem to be too interested in it, and I do.
I've lost you there, Councillor Swift. I think Councillor Swift might have frozen.
Talked about continue scales drag out. It would be nice to see Transport for the North give it a bit more priority, Chair.
Okay, thank you. That's a point well made, and I think we all agree.
I think, Chair, if I may, I think as colleagues have mentioned this previously, we have made these representations to Transport for the North, so we do pass on your comments that they need to give it the prominence that it deserves.
Yeah. So I do have a separate point, Chair.
Yes.
And that is on the issue on page 247, the item about Dewsbury and Wakefield bus station travel centres, noting the bit at the end that says that the Combined Authority Customer Services team will continue to discuss retail ticket and customer services at Wakefield bus station with Arriva. Right. Now, the closure of the travel centre at Wakefield bus station, was something which initially the public in Wakefield took as being part and parcel of the lockdown number one.
Yes.
What is actually happening is as the months drag by, it's something which is increasingly mentioned by members of the public and travellers in Wakefield. And I do appreciate that the economics of this travel centre were based on selling national travel tickets and so forth, accepted, but its actual function as an information and advice point for travellers, for passengers, is something which that there is now a vacuum. And as I say, as the months draw on, something that was kind of received with quite a degree of patience by the public is now rather less so. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. I'm going to bring in Dave Pearson because we've had quite a lot of dialogue on this. So
I can understand Councillor Swift's point, and similar members in the Dewsbury area have raised the similar concerns as well. It's a difficult one because Arriva have basically announced that they're not going to reopen the travel centre in its current form. I think what we do need to do look at Wakefield and Dewsbury as to how we can modify the services so that there is an inquiry provision in both places, and that we can look at the different ways in which people can buy tickets and order passes, which we are looking at travel centres across all of West Yorkshire and moving them into something a little bit similar to what we built at Castleford, which is an inquiry desk on the bus station concourse, as being probably a better way of doing that than rather have what is a fairly sort of old-fashioned style travel agency type of facility in each of the services. So yeah, we're alive to it. I think the difficulty we've got is it's difficult to make some definite decisions whilst we're in the COVID position, and in terms of how we can move forward. But we'll keep talking to Arriva about Wakefield, and we'll look at what we can do with Dewsbury.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And obviously Dewsbury, we've got the Transforming Cities Fund for Dewsbury bus station. So
it is in some respects, so it starts to move into how do we reimagine what Dewsbury bus station looks like.
Yeah. And we probably will take that to Councillor Homewood's district committee, so that he can pick that up as well. That would be useful, especially with the development going on in Dewsbury. So can we recommend, can you move the recommendations of this item? We are okay to move this now?
Yeah, move it, Chair.
Thank you. On to item 13, ask members to note the paper that updates members on the transport schemes that have been approved at the investment committee. Any questions or comments on that paper? No? Yep. Yes, Councillor Ball is waving. I thought you were saying goodbye. I'm going to close the meeting. Go on.
Well, you can do if you want. I'm sure Taj is already on top of this, being the Bradford cycling champion and a practitioner as well. But just a request, Taj, please, that on page 256, it's talking about the Manchester Road having a segregated cycleway. When the Leeds Bradford Superhighway was being developed and opened, they hadn't factored in maintenance on that, sweeping, winter maintenance and things like that. Can you make sure that when this is being done, Taj, that's put in from the early days, so that as soon as it's operational, there are sweeping measures in place, so that if we get any glass on a segregated cycleway where you're stuck between curbs at about 4 foot width, if there's any, as Taj knows, if there's any glass on them, the cyclists have got nowhere to go. And similarly, rock salt doesn't work on them in winter. The Leeds Bradford Superhighway had to convert a scadab sweeper to spray de-icer. So can you just refer that to Bradford, Taj, and make sure that's included, and hopefully regular maintenance of the routes? Thank you.
Difficult with dwindling budgets, but I'm sure Councillor Sam will take that back.
Well, it's pointless building it if we can't maintain it, Chair, because it just becomes dangerous.
I think Councillor Ball, as you are leader of the opposition on this transport committee, that's a point that we need to make to government about maintenance of cycling and walking scheme. There's got to be budgets for them. So I totally agree. So we'll send a letter. Yep. No. Okay. I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. And
Councillor Buckley's waving to you, Chair.
Councillor Buckley, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, item 2.1 about the walking and cycling and altering the highways and so on. There's been quite a bit of controversy in different parts of the country where carriageways, let's say 2 lanes or 3-lane carriageway, has been narrowed, and the number of lanes is still the same, but the width of the lanes is narrower. And the controversy has occurred because emergency vehicles, ambulances and fire engines and so on, haven't been able to get through because the traffic simply could not get out of the way because of the narrow lanes. And I just wonder whether somebody could give me reassurance that that cannot possibly happen here.
We can look into that. I think you raised it before at Leeds Council, didn't you? So we will look into that and come back to you on that, Councillor Buckley, if that's okay. What I have seen is some excellent schemes going in right across West Yorkshire. It would be great to share all that best practice. I think we're all learning on active travel, and obviously we've got to meet the government's new design standards. So it'd be great to share that best practice because there's some amazing schemes going in that have been really well used. Councillor Cahill?
I'll just add, I think, yeah, obviously we want to close off the meeting, so it's not time to have that long debate. But what I do want to add is just to confirm, and you'll see Connecting Leeds have just put a note out about this today earlier as well on the Twitter feed, that every scheme that's being implemented is sent to the emergency services to ensure that they have any comments to make. And as far as we're aware, there's no evidence in schemes elsewhere that the kind of measures we're putting forward through this emergency active travel fund have caused delays to emergency services anywhere across the country, and happy to see any evidence of those. But regarding the things like the low traffic neighbourhoods that have gone in around the country, in the majority of cases they've actually seen an increased the emergency services have got there faster due to the lack of cars on the local roads, which is where they're likely to be called up. So I just want to point that, because I think not providing an answer to that point and going off would give way to the fact that there's plenty of evidence that shows so far that these schemes aren't creating a problem. Very happy to see, obviously, any evidence and to have a discussion of that. But as far as I've seen, there's no concerns whatsoever to raise about that.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank you all for your time. I think it's been a really informative Transport Committee and all your contributions. And we've managed to finish nearly on time, only 2 minutes over, and have a guest speaker. So I'm not quite sure how that happened, because it's been a really good meeting in terms of debate. So I will see you in January. So have a safe Christmas, everyone.
As much as we can do. Cheers. All the best, everybody.